October is American Archives Month, and the National Scouting Museum celebrated by taking its show on the road as a participant in the first ever Archives Bizarre Bazaar held on Monday, October 28th at Meow Wolf in Santa Fe and coordinated by the New Mexico State Record Center and Archive. Archivists from all over the state gathered to share items in their collections that are unique, kooky, artistic, weird, and yes, just plain bizarre. We'll check out what the National Scouting Museum put on display and learn more about this event in this edition of Artifact of the Week. Before we get to the display, let's talk a little bit about the venue. Meow Wolf started in 2008 as a small collective of Santa Fe artists who felt shut out of the traditional art community in the area. These 7 renegade artists looked for a way to publicly display their work and develop their skills together. They were armed with a vision for what they wanted to create, however they lacked 2 vital resources, money and a building. Eventually, a benefactor bought them a building, and through the years of personal sacrifice and sweat equity, their vision became a reality. Today, Meow Wolf is a multi-billion-dollar registered public benefit company with locations in Santa Fe, Denver, Las Vegas, Grapevine, Texas, and Houston. For more information on Meow Wolf, check out their website at meowwolf.com. Joining me here in the Marchetti room is Rory Crofton. Rory was our representative at this event. And Rory, how did you learn about this opportunity and why did you think it was a good fit for the museum?
I am on just sort of a listserv of libraries and archives and museums in New Mexico, and one of the employees over at the New Mexico State Record Center and Archives sent out an announcement that he was planning on putting this opportunity together, trying to get different organizations in from around the state to put this event together. And it was limited to the first 9 organizations that were able to sign up. So I got with Dave Warhane, our director here at the museum, pretty quickly to see if that's something that we'd be interested in so we could throw our name out there and grab a table. And ultimately, I think that we thought it would be a cool way to kind of share some cool things from our collections that aren't normally on display, and also kind of get our name out there a little bit more. Most of the other organizations at the event were from Santa Fe or Albuquerque or that kind of area, and so kind of getting some people from beyond Philmont and beyond scouting interested and aware of what we have up here was kind of a big goal as well.
So once you determined it was a good fit for what we're doing and getting our message out, how did you go about deciding what you wanted to put on display?
So both myself and then my fall villa tour guide, Joey Freeman, we came over to the National Scouting Museum and started kind of going through the collections. Chris Elliott, our collections curator, kind of helped as well. And we kind of were just going through and seeing what caught our eye. There were a couple things that as soon as we signed up for the event, I kind of knew that we wanted to have in there. You'll see in a minute a piece by Ernest Thompson Seton that I knew instantly needed to go on display. But everything else we sort of just wandered through. We picked out probably 15, 20 things and then narrowed it down to what you'll see on the table here. Few suggestions came from Chris, some from Dave Warhane, some from you, I believe, and then Joey and I kind of just picked out anything else. And yeah, it was a pretty fun experience getting to go through and find everything.
So before we take a look at the specifics that you did take there and put on display, tell us a little bit about the event as a whole. What kind of people did you meet?
Yeah.
What kind of questions did they ask? What were they most interested in?
The event was held at Meow Wolf in what they call the Rainbow Room, which is their big kind of event space there. And so there were 9 other organizations represented. There was us, the New Mexico State Record Center and Archives, the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, the National Park Service, the New Mexico History Museum, among several others. And it was really open to everybody. It was open to the public. They did ask that you RSVP, but they really kind of just let anybody in as long as there was space in the room. Did get a little cramped at times. There was a lot more turnout than I think we were expecting, which is a really good problem to have. But we spoke to people. A lot of people were from the local Santa Fe area. We got a few other people that had come up from Albuquerque or some surrounding areas. As always, as I think we all kind of know, working in scouting, scouting connections run deep. So there we had a lot of former scouts, a few current scouts even show up, and we're super excited to see that we were there. But we also had a lot of people who had never heard of Philmont, had never heard of scouting, and so they were really kind of very excited to hear that we had this resource in this museum up here. So we focused on, the cool thing about the spread that we had is that we had some scouting items, we had some New Mexico history items, some natural history items, so there was kind of something for everybody, even if they weren't big scouters or didn't know a whole lot about scouting.
So what kind of questions did they ask?
I think one of the more popular things that people were curious about were the neckerchief slides. People, if they were not scouts, had no idea what a neckerchief slide even was. They just kind of saw these funky little wingdings there on the table. And so, yeah, there were a lot of questions about what is that? Why did you need that? What purpose does it serve? Another one that a lot of people had questions about was the mastodon tooth that we had. A lot of people thought it was a mammoth tooth, very common misconception. But we got to talk a whole lot about mastodons and kind of ancient critters that were roaming around here at Philmont and New Mexico as well.
About how many people would you think attended the event overall?
We're still waiting on the final numbers from Meow Wolf, but I believe we had over 400 that RSVP'd for it. Obviously, not everybody showed up, and we had some other people that didn't RSVP that wandered through, but we're thinking there was at least a couple hundred there, so pretty good turnout.
And so how many people did you guys actually interact with at the event?
I'd say roughly we had about 80 people that came up to us, and we actually had some sort of one-on-one interaction with them. That doesn't count the several, probably several hundred other people that just sort of wandered by and checked us out briefly. But yeah, we had at least 80 personal connections with people, which is pretty cool.
Let's go ahead and take a look at the table. Now, you mentioned to me there's a couple of items here that didn't make it on the display there, but we're going to include them anyway because they're part of the collection and they're pretty cool to talk about. So let's take a look at the items that are on the table.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I think one of the more popular pieces that we had on the display was our Boy Scout wax flesh down here. So wax flesh, it is it's a container of white flesh-colored wax. It was manufactured for the BSA by the Dodge Chemical Company of Cambridge, Massachusetts, around 1950, we think. And it's a pretty bizarre label, Boy Scout wax flesh, but it actually served a variety of useful purposes. It was used for basically creating faux wounds and injuries for first aid training. And they actually do still sell this product, but it's more commonly marketed, I believe, as just modeling wax. So that's a little less bizarre, but people love that. Our director here, Dave Werhane, actually thought it's very amusing because it weighs almost exactly a pound. So it's our literal pound of flesh, which is kind of weird. Right behind the flesh, we also have a couple of dolls, Steve Scout and Dave Cub action figures. So the action figures, they were a really big deal in the 1970s. The BSA saw that there was this huge jump in popularity for action figures, and so they wanted to get in on the action as well. So they partnered with Keener Products, was the toy company, and so they produced the initial doll was Steve Scout. So he's complete, officially licensed with his full Scout uniform and even making the Scout sign with his right hand. And that was ultimately so popular that they expanded the line. They had some different accessories that you could buy with the dolls, or with the action figures. They added another Scout action figure. They added 2 Cub Scout action figures, one of which we have here. The thing that makes these a little bizarre, though, we found out from our research, is that once the line was officially discontinued, they still had made all of these molds and all of these plastic pieces. And so they sold them off to a couple of toy companies in Europe, and they actually repurposed the bodies for other action figures, from like Italian surfer guys to race car drivers and stuff like that. But they all kept the distinctive Scout sign on their right hand, which was kind of weird. So zombie action figures there in a way. And then speaking of the Scout sign, right behind the action figures, we have this large wood-carved Scout sign hand. We believe it was carved with a chainsaw. We don't actually know when it was made. We don't know who the artist was, but it's a pretty distinctive piece from our collection here. And the thing that the reason we picked it out for being bizarre is that it does look kind of Night of the Living Dead a little bit here, hand shooting up from the ground. Certainly was not intended to be made as creepy or weird, but it's kind of taken on that look and kind of fit with the rest of the theme here. So these first 3 pieces, or first 3 items, were all from the collection of the National Scouting Museum. The piece right back here, though, is actually one of the first ones that we have that is not from the National Scouting Museum. This is from the Villa Fulmonte over where I work. And it's a hoof inkwell, if you can believe it. So this was actually out on Wade Phillips's desk down in the trophy room for anyone who's ever come on a Villa tour. And we're not entirely sure what animal it's from. Some people have said it's an elk. It kind of looks like a cattle hoof as well. We're not 100% sure, but it's a pretty bizarre little object that you keep your ink in, handy for writing all your letters and things in your office. And then if we move back down this way here, we have a fragment of the B-24 Liberator. And so if any of you have come out on Trek at Philmont, you're probably familiar with the story of the B-24 that crashed in 1942 at the summit of Trail Peak. And so most of these items, the wreckage is still up there on the trail. And we of course ask scouts as part of Leave No Trace to leave those items up there, those historic items up there. Ultimately, all of the crew members that were on that flight from Albuquerque to Kansas City and back perished, and so it is kind of like a living memorial up there for them. But every now and again, you get the odd person who takes a piece, either takes it home or as a souvenir, or brings it back down to the National Scouting Museum thinking like we need it for our collection. And they either report that weird things have happened to them that they attribute to taking a piece of the plane, or they just bring it down to us and we can't return it back up to the summit once it's been taken out of that context. So it ends up here in the collection, but kind of a sort of morbid/bizarre item as well. The next ones to look at, like I said earlier, these were by far and away the most popular. We have our novelty neckerchief slides here. So we picked out a handful of different pieces from the collection. We have hundreds of these at the National Scouting Museum. Some are kind of your basic, regular, run-of-the-mill neckerchief slides, but others get a little bit more creative and a little bit spooky and weird as well. One of the popular ones that I really liked pointing out was this one of the skull here. There's actually a light bulb in it, so you could even screw the light bulb in with a battery and the eyes would glow, we believe, like a red color. I think that might have been a little bit of a fire hazard, but hey, you know, it worked out. But we have a few others, like we have the molar, we have a cow skull, we have a mouse and cheese, a clown, a bird skull. We have a couple of weird looking Philmont burros here, one who's kind of got an itchy rear end here that he's going after, crossbones here with a saw. And then in the center, we have a few more kind of particularly crazy ones. We have this guy with an arrow through his head. We have some feet sticking out of the end of a tent. This kind of crazy looking guy here with his hairdo, and then this guy down at the end, I don't know, he almost looks like he should be a baseball mascot or something like that. The one item that you'll see in this collection, though, that is not a neckerchief slide is actually this silver Eagle Scout ring, though. That we believe was probably a paperweight. We kind of put it in there because it fit with the rest of the items, but it is, yeah, nonetheless a very extra large size of that Eagle Scout ring that many people receive once they earn that rank. This was another one of those really popular items that we had. I think the Boy Scout flesh, the neckerchief slides, and then the mastodon tooth are all of the ones that people asked more about than any other piece on the table. So the mastodon tooth here is just one piece, obviously, of a much larger fossil that was actually found here at Philmont. I was told that, ironically enough, it was found just below the tooth of time. According to Dave, our director, the rest of the fossil was actually sent off, we believe, to the Smithsonian, but we ended up with one of the teeth here, which is kind of cool. A lot of people think that the lower section down here is the teeth because it looks, the top of the tooth, because it looks very jagged and pointy. But believe it or not, the softer part up here at the top, that is actually what the top of the tooth would have been, really great for grinding down all that organic plant material that the mastodons would have been eating. We get to our first piece that sadly did not make the cut once we actually made it down to Meow Wolf. We put everything together here at the National Scouting Museum, we staged it, and then when we got there, unfortunately we found that the table was just a little bit smaller than we anticipated. So we ended up having to cut two things. So this one is the first that we had to cut. This is civil defense radiological monitoring equipment here. So of course, during the Cold War, with the threat of nuclear bombs and other threats like that, public shelters would have been issued with, as well as members of the public, would have been issued with these different monitoring kits. And that way you would have been able to use them to kind of determine if it was safe to come out of your shelter after a nuclear attack, or what the kind of damage was. And so we have a few different things. We have the actual device itself, along with a charger, and even a handbook, Introduction to Radiological Monitoring for Self-Study at Home. So you could brush up on all of that there while you were reading away in the shelter. And then our next piece that sadly didn't make the cut is this one right back here, this large framed drawing. This is actually a piece that was done by Daniel Carter Beard, of course, one of the co-founders of the Boy Scouts of America, Scouting America. He, of course, was known for a number of things, but he was, among those things, an artist. He painted and drew a number of, very kind of normal scenes and items, but he did have an eye for some of the more bizarre and unusual things as well. So this piece, we're not actually 100% sure what inspired him to put this together, but we have all of these seashells here that have kind of taken on human characteristics, and they're pleading with this giant disembodied hand that is coming in and plucking them up, labeled commercial collectors, and they're all saying, oh, I am this type of snail, I'm this type of shell, and kind of pleading with them not to take them away. So I don't know if there was some big issue with collectors threatening an endangered species at some point or something like that, but just the fact that we have all of these things together is kind of wacky. Right in front of Dan Beard's piece, we have another photo from the Villa Fulmonte collection, and this is, of course, of our best friend, Omar the camel. So again, if any of you have been through on a Villa tour, you're probably familiar with the story of Omar. Chope Phillips, Wade and Genevieve's son, he once went out with the family to visit his uncle, Frank Phillips, over at his ranch, Woolaroc, over in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And Woolaroc, whilst a lot smaller than Philmont, featured, among other things, a large collection of exotic wildlife. He kind of had a big exotic petting zoo there. And one of the many animals that Frank had on the ranch was a number of camels. And so Chope, on the visit, very wishfully said, wouldn't it be cool if I had a camel as well? And so once he returned back to Philmont for his birthday, Uncle Frank sent Omar the camel over here as a yearling. He actually lived on the property for about 4 years. He lived in the pasture just below the Tooth of Time, and apparently really loved interacting with everybody who came to visit him, all the horses he made very good friends with. As if the story of having a camel in the middle of New Mexico wasn't already bizarre enough, though, Omar unfortunately met an untimely end just about 4 years after he got here, when he was found lifeless and not breathing in that same pasture, we believe as a result of being struck by lightning. So, pretty crazy story there. And then the last 3 pieces that we have back here are all kind of more artwork. I'm going to start off with the one in the center here. So this is, it's titled A View of Ye Industry of Ye Beavers of Canada. We believe it was actually put together around 1715, and it's depicting these beavers in early colonial North America right in front of what we now know as Niagara Falls. Doesn't really have a very close Scouting or Philmont connection, but it is in our collection for whatever reason. And if you look really closely at all of these guys, the reason we picked it out is mostly just because of its bizarre depiction of these beavers. I don't know if any of you have seen a beaver before. I have, and they don't really look like anything that you're seeing right here, but the artist did his best, I guess. The final 2 pieces that I'm going to point out, though, were both done by another co-founder of the BSA, Ernest Thompson Seton, who's a particularly big deal here for us at Philmont, because here at the National Scouting Museum, we house a huge collection of Seton's former Native American artifacts, artwork, natural history collection, and most of those pieces, most of the art pieces that Seton put together were, of course, very heavily naturalist focused. So he has some very stunning pictures of wildlife and flora, fauna. Some of his pieces, though, are a little bit more quirky, a little quirkier. The first one here is a sketch that he did of a very happy dog. You can see him wagging his tail away here. But instead of a chew toy, he's got a pretty bizarre thing in his mouth there. It looks like a severed human hand with blood dripping along there. But he seems very proud of himself. And then the piece that I knew instantly needed to be included once we signed up for this event is this piece by Seton back here. We have the devil, or what looks like the devil, riding on wolfback, I guess. It's actually titled The Devil's Fox. So we're not actually sure if it's supposed to be that infamous depiction of Lobo the wolf that we know about here at Philmont, or if it's a fox. But yeah, it's a pretty wacky depiction nonetheless.
Finding new and interesting ways to share the stories of scouting and the Philmont Scout Ranch is a vital part of the mission of the National Scouting Museum. Thanks to Rory and Joey for taking our story on the road to the Archives Bizarre. That's all the time we have for this week. Join us next time as we continue to learn more about the history of Scouting America through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.